Jeremy Corbyn goes after the aspiring working class, the Labour Party are reported to the Electoral Commission, and John Bercow leaves the House of Commons. Now we start today's video with some good news. John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons, as of today, has now stopped being a Member of Parliament and has left his role as Speaker of the House. Now they have the election for the new Speaker later today, so we're going to report on that tomorrow. But wait, let's talk about what Jeremy Corbyn has been up to. Now he is now going after the billionaires and the rich. Now this might sound like a good idea for some people, like, oh yeah, but we need to have a more fairer society. Why do we have all these rich people controlling all the money? What about everybody else? Well, that's not really true, is it? Jeremy Corbyn tweeted, when 26 billionaires have the same wealth as half of the world's population, it's clear that the system is broken. It's time for a real change. Now the first problem is that when it comes to the billionaires, the millionaires, or the top 1%, the top 10%, things have changed compared to, a century ago. The majority of the people are now self-made. The majority of them come from working class backgrounds. And it's also the same Labour Party who claim that if you're born working class, or if you're born middle class, you can't just change your class. Even if you get a lot of money, or if you lose all your money, you are still middle class, upper class, or working class. So if you go with that, then obviously considering almost the majority of the people who are now rich today come from working class backgrounds, and there are a lot of people who come from working class or lower middle class backgrounds who want to work hard and achieve for their family, for their community, for themselves, and obviously give something back. He's also going after them, and this is why. Labour would ban billionaires, says the prominent Corbyn supporter. Lloyd Russel-Moyle, the MP for Brighton Kemp Town, signalled a Corbyn government would redistribute the assets of the most wealthy, citing their tax dodgers and bad landlords. He told Emma Barnett on a show that I don't think anyone in this country should be a billionaire. Those people who are the very 1% of the top of this country, they are the people who are able to offshore their wealth out of this country. They are the people who pull the strings. Now, before we actually give you some facts about this issue, let's actually clarify that the policy that they're going to be coming up with at some point, they do say the headline is about billionaires and then millionaires, but actually in reality, they're talking about the wealthy, and you can't really define that, how much wealth. The majority of the people in this country have some wealth or savings when it comes to having a house or some savings, cash. That's just when you become older. The older you get, the longer you work throughout your life, the more money you're going to be saving. And you're going to have some sort of house for yourself or a couple of houses for your family. So essentially, a lot of pensioners would be affected by this directly and indirectly. But let's talk about some facts, because when it comes to different income groups and the income tax revenue that it generates for the government, all the things that we pay for, the NHS, the welfare state and everything else, doesn't come from the bottom 10%. It doesn't even come from the bottom 50%, who are the middle income earners in this country. It comes from the top 10%. The top 10% pays almost the 55% of it generates the tax revenue for the government that will pay for the public services. Now, this is despite this offshore tax arguments that socialists always come up with, because it makes absolutely no sense. Now, if you get rid of that, who's going to pay for it? If everyone's poorer, if everyone makes less, the government makes less money as well. That's just the reality. Now, the Labour MP Rebecca Long-Bailey was grilled on Sky News about this topic, and this is what she said.
At the same time, that's very different, isn't it, talking about the need to rebalance the economy and saying nobody in the whole of the country should be a billionaire, particularly when you take into account that the top 1% of earners actually paid 27% of the country's income tax. I mean, to many people listening, they'll think, this just sounds like the politics of envy.
It's not the politics of envy. I think that Lloyd Russel-Moyle was highlighting the staggering inequality that we see in Great Britain that makes many people angry. There's nothing wrong with working hard, and certainly we advocate that. You work hard, do well, but ultimately we've got a moral responsibility, all of us, to pay tax and to improve the communities in which we live. But we also can't be within an economy that sees people sleeping on the streets and homeless, those who are going to food banks just to receive food, and many many of whom are actually in paid work at the moment. And I think we must recognise that there are fundamental problems in our economy that have to be addressed. Of course, we want people to do well and we want to celebrate that, but we also need to recognise that something fundamentally has to change so that we're not seeing this inequality, which quite frankly is akin to Victorian times at the moment.
Now, it's time for some education, basic education on economics. Now, this is the argument that the socialists have been using for years and years, and it actually comes from Karl Marx. They assume that money is part of our limited resources. So if there are basically 10 marbles, and if two people hold 8 of them, then obviously there's only 2 left for everybody else. So we have to redistribute wealth and redistribute those marbles. In reality, it doesn't work that way. There's something called wealth creation, and it happens under a free market system. I don't care if 10% of the country owns the majority of the wealth, the current wealth, because under a free market system, as we've seen in the West, you just create new wealth. I don't care what they do at the top. Even if they don't spend any of their money, they just hide it in their house. Doesn't really matter, because people will still be able to create businesses and create jobs, and they create new wealth for themselves, and more people could join that top percent, and that top percent will turn into top 20%, top 30%. That's just a reality. And actually Margaret Thatcher had this argument when she was Prime Minister.
But what the honourable member is saying is that he would rather the poor were poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That way you will never create the wealth for better social services as we have. And what a policy! Yes, he would rather have the poor poorer, provided the rich were less rich. That is the Liberal policy. Yes, it came out, he didn't intend it to, but he did. I think that the honourable gentleman knows that I have the same contempt for his socialist policies as the people of East Europe who have experienced it have it for theirs. I think I must have hit the right nail on the head when I pointed out that the logic of those policies are they'd rather have the poor poorer. Once they start to talk about the gap, they'd rather the gap were that. Down here. That. Not that. But that. So long as the gap is smaller, so long as the gap is smaller, they'd rather have the poor poorer. You do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property owning.
And that's just a simple fact. Money and wealth are not limited resources. They are unlimited. You could create as much money as you can in an economy as long as you are productive. That's just reality. Now, a lot of people ask who Rebecca Long-Bailey actually is, and what is the potential path when it comes to her political career. Well, watch this.
John McDonnell says he wants the next leader of the Labour Party to be a woman. Are you being lined up?
Well, at the moment, we are getting Jeremy Corbyn elected as Prime Minister.
Well, that's a yes. Yes, she is one of the potential candidates to become Labour leader. She would potentially be replacing Jeremy Corbyn. So a lot of people think Corbyn is terrible now, it's horrifying, so we just can't wait for him to go. But all the potential candidates that we have, they're not moderates. They're worse than him, or at least as bad as him. Now, in other news, the Labour Party's Momentum group have been found to have broken the electoral law. And surprise, surprise. This is what happened in the last election, and they're doing it again, so they are now being reported to the Electoral Commission. Momentum set to break electoral law again. Momentum is currently not registered as a non-party campaigner with the Electoral Commission, which they have to be if they intend to spend more than £20,000 in England in the general election. They were found to have lied about overspending during their last general election campaign and cynically committed electoral fraud. Yeah, this was what happened last time, and they were fined by the Electoral Commission for multiple breaches of the electoral law. But this time, they are now being reported to the Electoral Commission by the Conservative Party. Following Guido's exclusive yesterday, the Electoral Commission put out a bland statement that they were monitoring non-party campaigners. Tory Vice Chairman Paul Scully has now written to the Electoral Commission to raise their concern about Momentum's failure to register as a non-party campaigner for the upcoming election. It's because, as we said, if a non-party campaigner intends to spend more than £20,000, the law requires that they should be registered with the Electoral Commission. Momentum have already been spending money over the last couple of months, so could well have already committed a technical breach. The law clearly states that under Political Parties Election Referendums Act 2000, non-party campaigners are required to register with the Electoral Commission if they incur controlled expenditure over a prescribed threshold during the regulated period prior to an election. But this is where we are now, so the Labour Party could actually be hit very soon by the Electoral Commission if there's action. If there's no action, actually, who's going to be hit more is going to be the ordinary people and all of us in the country, because if Labour managed to win this election, it's because of this. It's because of them cheating with big money, all the big trade union money and the Remainers behind them. And it's not going to be a fair battle. So we'll have to see how it goes. But as most of you know, obviously I'm going to be traveling around to all the marginal seats throughout this election. Hopefully from Wednesday, tomorrow Wednesday, I'll be letting you know where I'm going to be visiting. Some of you have already sent me messages to ask me to visit your areas. I'll let you know beforehand, so you could, if you want to join us, say hi or anything, it'll be good. And if you want to stay up to date with everything, you could follow me on Twitter and Instagram. You could find the details down here. And as always, don't forget to share this video and subscribe. And always click on the bell next to it so you get notified when I release a new video. I'm Tousi, and I'll see you tomorrow with a new video.